If you're over 60 and you've been eating less, walking more, and still watching your waistline grow, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not failing. The strategy is wrong. Visceral fat, the deep belly fat that wraps around your liver, your heart, and your pancreas, does not behave like regular fat after 60. It doesn't respond the same way to calorie restriction. It doesn't shrink just because you cut carbs. And the reason for that comes down to 3 biological shifts that happen in your body after your 6th decade of life. I'm Dr. William Lee, and on this channel, Aging Strong Together, we don't talk about weight loss. We talk about the science of what actually changes in your body and what you can eat to work with that biology, not against it. Today, I'm going to walk you through 8 specific fruits backed by peer-reviewed research that directly target the 3 root causes of visceral fat accumulation after 60. And I'm going to show you exactly how to eat them in the morning for maximum effect. Stay with me through fruit number 5, because that one comes with a warning that your doctor may never have mentioned, and it affects millions of Americans over 60 who are on common prescriptions. Let's get into it. I want to start with something most health videos skip entirely, and it's the reason most diets fail for people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond. There are 2 types of fat in your body. The first is subcutaneous fat. That's the fat just under your skin, the kind you can pinch. It's cosmetically frustrating, but it's metabolically relatively harmless. The second type, the one that genuinely matters for your health, is visceral fat. This fat lives inside your abdominal cavity. It wraps itself around your internal organs, and unlike subcutaneous fat, it's not just sitting there quietly. Visceral fat is metabolically active. It continuously secretes inflammatory proteins called cytokines directly into your bloodstream, into the same blood supply that feeds your liver and your heart. That chronic low-grade inflammation is linked to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and even certain cancers. And here's the critical point. After 60, 3 specific biological shifts make your body dramatically more prone to accumulating visceral fat. Shift number 1, hormonal changes. When estrogen and testosterone decline, as they do for both men and women after 60, your body's fat distribution changes. Fat that used to accumulate in the hips and thighs now migrates inward. This is not a willpower problem. This is physiology. Shift number 2, chronic cortisol elevation. Cortisol is your stress hormone. As we age, our cortisol regulation becomes less efficient, and levels tend to creep upward over time, especially in the morning. Cortisol directly signals your body to store fat in the visceral depot. More cortisol means more belly fat, regardless of what you eat. Shift number 3, insulin resistance. This is perhaps the most important. After 60, your cells become progressively less responsive to insulin. When insulin can't do its job efficiently, your body compensates by producing more of it. And high insulin is one of the most powerful signals to store fat viscerally. So here's the real question. What can you eat to actually address these 3 drivers? This is where the science on specific fruits becomes genuinely remarkable. The compounds found in these 8 fruits work through measurable biological mechanisms, reducing inflammatory cytokines, improving insulin receptor sensitivity, and lowering cortisol output. And research consistently shows that eating them in the morning, when your cortisol is at its daily peak and your insulin sensitivity is at its most responsive, amplifies these effects significantly. Let me walk you through each one. We start with what I consider the most well-researched fruit for visceral fat in older adults, and that's the humble blueberry. The active compounds in blueberries are called anthocyanins, the pigments that give them that deep blue-purple color. Anthocyanins are among the most potent natural inhibitors of something called NF-kappa B, the so-called master switch of inflammation in your body. When NF-kappa B activity is chronically elevated, as it tends to be after 60, visceral fat accumulation accelerates. Blueberry anthocyanins help turn that switch down. But here's what makes blueberries especially compelling for this age group. A study out of Tufts University, one of the leading nutrition research institutions in the country, found that adults who consume blueberries daily for 8 weeks showed a measurable reduction in visceral adiposity compared to controls. Not just weight loss in general, specifically visceral fat reduction. Additionally, blueberries improve insulin sensitivity at the cellular level by enhancing glucose transporter activity, meaning your cells respond better to insulin without needing as much of it. How to eat them in the morning? Half a cup of blueberries, fresh or frozen, it doesn't matter. Frozen actually preserves the anthocyanins beautifully, paired with a few tablespoons of plain, unsweetened Greek yogurt. No honey, no granola. The fat in the yogurt slows the absorption of the natural sugars and extends the anti-inflammatory window. One note for my 60-plus viewers. If you're managing blood sugar with medication, blueberries are one of the safest fruits you can eat. Their glycemic impact is low, and the fiber content further blunts any glucose response. I know what some of you are thinking. An avocado is a fruit? Botanically, yes, and it's one of the most powerful foods we have for visceral fat reduction after 60. Avocados are rich in oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat, and a compound called beta-sitosterol, a plant sterol that has a particularly interesting effect on cortisol. Remember cortisol, shift number 2 in our visceral fat story? Beta-sitosterol has been shown in clinical studies to actually lower cortisol levels in the bloodstream. And because cortisol is one of the primary hormones signaling your body to deposit fat viscerally, reducing it even modestly has a direct impact on where your body stores energy. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition out of Penn State University looks specifically at middle-aged and older adults who consumed 1 avocado per day. The results showed significant reductions in visceral adiposity, and crucially, the effect was greater in women post-menopause, precisely the population most vulnerable to hormonal visceral fat accumulation. How to eat it in the morning. A quarter of a ripe avocado with a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, eaten on an empty stomach or as the first component of your morning meal. The lemon adds vitamin C, which further supports cortisol regulation, and the healthy fat primes your digestive system to absorb the fat-soluble compounds in other fruits you'll eat throughout the morning. You do not need to eat half an avocado. A quarter is sufficient for the therapeutic effect and keeps the calorie load reasonable. This one surprises most people, and it works through a mechanism that's completely unique on this list. Tart cherries, not sweet cherries, specifically the Montmorency variety, contain 2 compounds that attack visceral fat from 2 completely different angles simultaneously. The first is melatonin. Most people think of melatonin as a sleep supplement, but tart cherries are one of the few foods that contain meaningful concentrations of natural melatonin. And here's why that matters for visceral fat. When you sleep poorly, your cortisol rhythm is disrupted, and your body spends more of the nighttime hours in fat storage mode rather than fat burning mode. Tart cherry melatonin improves the quality of deep sleep, particularly the slow wave sleep stages, which in turn allows cortisol to drop to its proper nighttime baseline. The second compound is the anthocyanins we already discussed. But tart cherries contain a specific profile of anthocyanins that have been shown in animal and early human studies to activate something called the AMPK pathway. AMPK is an enzyme that functions essentially like a metabolic master switch. When AMPK is activated, your cells shift from fat storage mode into fat oxidation mode. It's the same pathway activated by vigorous exercise and certain medications like metformin. Getting it from food is one of the most elegant strategies in nutritional medicine. A study published in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that tart cherry consumption reduced abdominal fat mass and lowered inflammatory markers, including CRP, in overweight adults. How to use tart cherries in the morning. 1 tablespoon of tart cherry concentrate. Look for 100% pure, no added sugar, stirred into a small glass of warm water. Drink it first thing in the morning. This is also, interestingly, a combination that many of my patients use to help with joint inflammation and morning stiffness, an added benefit that matters a great deal to the 60-plus community. Kiwi is genuinely one of the most underrated fruits in nutritional science, and it earns its place on this list for 2 very distinct reasons. First, vitamin C. 2 kiwis contain more vitamin C than an orange, and this matters more than most people realize when we're talking about visceral fat. Vitamin C is a direct precursor to cortisol regulation. A landmark study from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand found that supplementing with vitamin C significantly reduced salivary cortisol levels in adults within 4 weeks. And we've already established that cortisol is one of the primary drivers of visceral fat deposition after 60. Getting vitamin C from whole food, not supplements, delivers it alongside fiber and polyphenols that enhance its bioavailability. Second, inositol. This is a little-known compound found in meaningful concentrations in kiwi, and it directly improves insulin receptor signaling. Inositol essentially helps the insulin receptor on your cells work more efficiently, so your pancreas doesn't have to pump out as much insulin to manage blood glucose. Lower circulating insulin means less visceral fat signaling. How to eat kiwi in the morning? 2 kiwis eaten whole. And here's something most people don't know. The skin of the kiwi contains 3 times the fiber concentration of the flesh. The skin is edible. It's slightly fuzzy and tart, but perfectly safe and nutritionally superior. If you can tolerate it, eat the whole kiwi, skin and all. If not, slice it in half and scoop the flesh. You're still getting substantial benefit. Do not blend kiwi into a smoothie first thing in the morning. The rapid oxidation of vitamin C in blended form reduces its bioavailability significantly. Eat it whole. I promised you this one was important, and I want to give it the full attention it deserves because it works on a mechanism that no other fruit on this list touches. Grapefruit contains 2 compounds that are extraordinary for visceral fat: nootkatone and naringenin. Nootkatone, the compound that gives grapefruit its distinctive aroma, is a potent activator of the AMPK pathway we discussed with tart cherries. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showed that nootkatone activation of AMPK increased fat oxidation and energy expenditure even without changes in diet. In practical terms, it shifts your metabolism toward burning stored fat, specifically visceral fat, which is preferentially mobilized during AMPK activation. Naringenin is a flavonoid that works primarily in the liver. Your liver is the primary organ responsible for packaging dietary fat into triglycerides for storage. Naringenin reduces the liver's triglyceride synthesis activity, meaning less fat gets packaged and stored viscerally after meals. A study in the journal Diabetes found that naringenin reversed several components of metabolic syndrome in animal models, with human studies showing promising reductions in liver fat and waist circumference. How to eat grapefruit in the morning. Half a grapefruit eaten 30 minutes before your main breakfast. No sugar added. I know it's bitter. That bitterness is the naringenin working. You can squeeze a small amount of raw honey if absolutely necessary, but try to wean yourself off it. Now, the critical warning, and I want every single person watching this to pay close attention. Grapefruit contains compounds called furanocoumarins that inhibit an enzyme in your intestines called CYP3A4. This enzyme is responsible for metabolizing a long list of commonly prescribed medications. If grapefruit disables this enzyme, your medication levels in the bloodstream can rise dramatically, sometimes to dangerous levels. Medications commonly affected include statins, atorvastatin, simvastatin, lovastatin, calcium channel blockers for blood pressure, amlodipine, felodipine, certain immunosuppressants, some anti-anxiety medications, several anticoagulants. If you take any prescription medication, please talk to your doctor or pharmacist before adding grapefruit to your regular routine. This is not optional. The interaction is real, it's well documented, and it matters more for people over 60 who are more likely to be on multiple medications. For those of you who are not on any of these medications, grapefruit is an exceptional fruit. Don't let the warning stop you from asking the question. Pomegranate has been studied in medicine for decades, but the research specifically on visceral fat and aging in the last 10 years has been remarkable. The key compounds are called elagitannins, specifically punicalagins, which are unique to pomegranate. Here's what makes them special. When elagitannins reach your gut bacteria, certain strains of bacteria convert them into compounds called urolithins. And urolithins have a biological effect that is genuinely exciting for anyone over 60. Urolithins activate a cellular cleaning process called mitophagy, the removal and recycling of damaged mitochondria. As we age, our cells accumulate dysfunctional mitochondria that produce inflammatory signals and reduce energy efficiency. Urolithin-driven mitophagy clears these out, renews the mitochondrial population in muscle cells, and improves metabolic function at the cellular level. Healthier mitochondria in muscle cells means more fat oxidation capacity. Beyond urolithins, pomegranate juice and seeds directly reduce inflammatory markers. A study from UCLA found that daily pomegranate consumption significantly lowered CRP, C-reactive protein, and IL-6, two of the primary inflammatory markers associated with visceral fat accumulation, after just 12 weeks. How to eat pomegranate in the morning. A quarter cup of fresh pomegranate arils, the seeds, as part of your morning fruit rotation. Alternatively, 4 ounces of 100% pomegranate juice, no added sugar. Be aware that pomegranate juice is calorie dense. 4 ounces is the therapeutic dose. More than that tips the sugar balance unfavorably. One practical note, not everyone produces urolithins from elagitannins. It depends on your specific gut microbiome. If you've been through a course of antibiotics recently or have a compromised gut microbiome, the urolithin effect may be diminished. This is actually a good argument for pairing pomegranate with a quality probiotic. I am very specific here. I'm not talking about red apples. I'm talking about Granny Smith green apples, and the difference matters biologically. Green apples, particularly the Granny Smith variety, contain 2 compounds in concentrations significantly higher than red apple varieties. The first is ursolic acid, found primarily in the skin. Ursolic acid does something remarkable. It simultaneously promotes muscle mass preservation and fat mass reduction. Research from the University of Iowa showed that ursolic acid increased brown fat, the metabolically active fat that burns calories, and reduced white fat accumulation, including visceral deposits. After 60, when sarcopenia, muscle loss, is already a major concern, a compound that addresses both muscle preservation and visceral fat is particularly valuable. You're not just losing fat, you're protecting the muscle that keeps your metabolism active. The second compound is pectin, a prebiotic fiber found in the flesh and especially the skin of green apples. Pectin specifically nourishes a gut bacterium called Akkermansia muciniphila, which in recent years has emerged as one of the most important species for metabolic health. Higher levels of Akkermansia are consistently associated with lower visceral fat mass, better insulin sensitivity, and reduced systemic inflammation. Feeding it with green apple pectin every morning is one of the simplest dietary interventions you can make for your gut microbiome. How to eat it in the morning. 1 medium Granny Smith apple eaten whole with the skin, always with the skin, because that's where both the ursolic acid and the concentrated pectin live. Eat it before your coffee, not after. Coffee consumed before fruit accelerates gastric motility and reduces the contact time of pectin with your intestinal lining, which reduces its prebiotic effectiveness. We close our list with a fruit that works on visceral fat through a pathway that's entirely different from everything we've discussed. And it's one that directly addresses a problem that almost every person over 60 is dealing with, whether they know it or not. Papaya contains a proteolytic enzyme called papain, and papain is one of the most potent natural anti-inflammatory enzymes we know of in the gut. Why does this matter for visceral fat? Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough in mainstream health content. Gut inflammation is a primary driver of visceral fat accumulation. When the lining of your gut is chronically inflamed from processed foods, stress, reduced stomach acid that commonly comes with aging, or changes in the gut microbiome, it triggers a systemic inflammatory response that directly promotes visceral fat deposition. Papain reduces this gut inflammation by breaking down pro-inflammatory proteins in the digestive tract and restoring the mucosal barrier integrity. Beyond papain, papaya is rich in lycopene and beta-cryptoxanthin, carotenoids that have been shown in research to reduce adipogenesis, which is the process of creating new fat cells. After 60, you want to be reducing the creation of new fat cells, not just the size of existing ones. These carotenoids interfere with the genetic signaling that tells stem cells to differentiate into adipocytes, fat cells. This is genuinely cutting-edge nutritional science. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that carotenoid-rich diets were significantly associated with lower visceral fat mass and smaller waist circumference in adults over 55, independent of caloric intake. How to eat papaya in the morning. 1 cup of fresh papaya, ripe but not overripe, because overripe papaya loses papain activity. Add a squeeze of fresh lime juice, which increases the bioavailability of the lycopene, and a small pinch of fresh or powdered ginger, which synergizes with papain for gut inflammation reduction. This combination takes about 90 seconds to prepare and is one of the most anti-inflammatory breakfasts in the nutritional literature. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Dr. Lee, am I supposed to eat all 8 of these every single morning? The answer is no. And honestly, trying to eat all 8 daily would be counterproductive and unsustainable. Here's the system I recommend, and it's built on a principle I call rotational variety. Your gut microbiome benefits most from diversity of plant compounds. Eating the same 2 fruits every day trains only a narrow set of beneficial bacteria. Rotating through all 8 across a week feeds a much broader and more resilient microbial ecosystem. The practical approach. Choose 3 to 4 fruits from the list each morning. Rotate them across the week so that every fruit appears at least twice in a 7-day period. Prioritize the fruits that address your specific concern. If cortisol and stress is your primary issue, lean on avocado, kiwi, and tart cherry. If insulin resistance is your dominant concern, blueberries, grapefruit, and green apple should anchor your rotation. Timing within the morning matters. Eat your fruit before any starchy or high carbohydrate foods. The fiber and polyphenols in these fruits prime your insulin receptors and create a buffering effect for the glucose that comes later in the meal. Avoid eating fruit immediately after coffee. Give yourself at least 20 minutes between your first cup and your fruit.